Alright everybody, welcome back, and here we go with round 6 loop knot test. This is the final video for those, and it's going to be testing dropper loops for monofilament. If you're looking to see how I tied the dropper loop, you can check back on part 3 when we tested fluoro. In that video I showed the dropper loops that I'm tying. If you've been following along, you know that monofilament seems to have the upper edge here with loop knots, as we were getting in the 20s for both the non-slip and the perfection, and when we were in the fluorocarbon we were really only getting in the teens. But dropper loops are a tough one to crack. I definitely had some trouble with the dropper loops with the monofilament, and yeah, I was a little surprised because I do use dropper loops quite a bit. And as I've mentioned before though, when I do the dropper loops, I'll use heavier line. And yeah, this testing has actually showed me that I don't really want to use dropper loops for light leader line. I think I mentioned in a previous video how I've been starting to tie what was, I think, termed the T-knot or T-dropper loop. And yeah, although preliminary testing showed it to be pretty good, I tested it a little bit more on maxima and on vanish, and yeah, actually I didn't get any values higher. If anything, I got lower values. So yeah, pretty much just stop testing it. Here's a quick picture of what the T-dropper loop looks like. And yeah, surprisingly it didn't help, and I think it's just because the bottom loop failed all the time. And yeah, the coils just seem to wrap up a lot. I guess when the line's thin like this and those coils just tighten around it too much, then it just snaps easily. But as you've seen with this suffix, in total 3 out of the 6 tests the bottom loop failed. So that meant the coils were strangling the main line, I guess, too much, and it broke. In the next round of testing, when the maxima is up, actually all 6 times the bottom loop failed. And with hybrid, 4 out of 6 times the bottom loop failed. So quite a bit of failures on the bottom loop. More than half of the time it failed on the bottom loop, which is definitely much more than the fluoro. I think on the fluoro it was maybe only like 2 out of all 18 tests. So this is dropper loops are where the fluoro and mono got pretty close to each other. I think the mono still has the edge, as we'll see when we tally all these numbers. But in general, and compared to the perfection loop and the non-slip, the dropper loop was much closer to fluorocarbon with its numbers. So because these results weren't great, I also kind of just researched around looking for some other types of loop knots that people tie with any success, and yeah, I didn't really find much. I've done double overhand loops before, just in a quick pinch, and that seemed to work. But when I tested that out here, it did slip, and not after much force. So I guess that only works with thicker line as well. However, the double overhand loop, when connected to the top, as sort of like a terminal knot, it did actually perform really well. Pretty much in line with perfection and non-slip. I tested just vanish and maxima a little bit and got very similar numbers to perfection loop and non-slip. So yeah, double overhand loop is actually a pretty strong knot for when it's being pulled by the loop. But if it's, in the middle of your main line and the main line is like pulling it apart, it just slipped. It slipped quite easily. So just to give you guys some updates on some further testing type videos that are coming out, the weathering test that I've been working on is kind of being put on hold because the bucket that they were in was got pretty frozen, and yeah, I didn't, we got a lot of snow up here, and it's just been tough to kind of replicate the weathering that we would be experiencing, where there's more sun and probably hotter weather. So I'm not really sure if I want to do the test just yet or if I want to wait until it gets a little warmer and, just weather it even more. I think it's been sitting there for quite a bit now, since maybe mid-December. But it would be nice if I just leave them there, because I some of the lines I've used all of them up, so I don't have any more of like the top knot and some of the other lines. So I want to be able to incorporate a good abrasion test with it without having to buy more line. So thinking of waiting a little bit to do that one. So before we go back to weathering and finishing some of the abrasion tests, I'm gonna do clinch knot next, and then possibly Palomar knot, and then maybe a couple more terminal type knots, and then I'll probably finish it off with a line to line, a braid to mono, braid to fluoro, and I'll probably just do the FG knot and the crazy Alberto knot. So that's just kind of an outline of the plan of some of the videos I'm going to try and get out before the season starts back up in April. So here you see the first test of the hybrid breaking at 11.39, and yeah, that's just really bad. I think it's still better than one of the tests from the Blue Label, but it's really, really bad. It's really low, especially considering this hybrid was breaking on non-slip loop at like 30. So this was the lowest one for hybrid, but hybrid in general had a pretty disappointing showing, and yeah, I was really rooting for it because it had just done so well on perfection and non-slip, but it definitely did not perform well at all in the dropper loop. So yeah, I guess I would still use it as a leader. I just definitely wouldn't put a dropper loop in the leader. bottom loop again.
Go.
Careful, it's gonna pop.
Whoa. Dad!
Alright, final results, here they are. We got 19.72 for suffix, 16.45 for maxima, and the hybrid at 15.29. So if you take the average divided by the highest, and you'll see I put the colors there. If you take the average and divide it by that 30.36 for hybrid, that's why you only get about 50%. And if you do the same for the maxima with the 22.68 and the suffix 27.12, then you get the 73%. In this final table, it shows the comparison between the green monofilament lines and the yellow fluorocarbon lines for all three knots. And I just put their averages, no percentages, just so you see what the raw numbers are.